Hey everyone, welcome to English Pod, where we make learning English fun with How I Met Your Mother. In this series, I'll break down keywords, slang, idioms, and cultural references from each episode to help you improve your English naturally. Watch before or after the episode to boost your understanding. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's dive in.
So let's start with something I think a lot of people maybe have heard of, but they don't really know what it is.
I think that's true.
The subjunctive mood.
Okay.
All right, so there's a line, or at least a spirit of a line you could imagine in this episode that goes something like this. It's not like I'm asking you to be someone you're not.
Okay.
Now that little word, be there, that's
So-
what we're talking about.
All right. Yeah, what's interesting there is it's just be,
Yeah,
not to be or are. It's the base form.
right.
And that's the present subjunctive. And you see it pop up in these like hypotheticals or these non-real situations,
Right.
especially after verbs like ask, suggest, insist, that kind of thing.
Okay.
So in this case, like in that example, the speaker is kind of like, downplaying the request.
Oh, yeah.
They're framing it as something that they're not doing.
Yeah.
And it creates that like subtle distance from reality.
Yeah. So it's almost like a what if scenario,
Yeah.
even while they're denying it.
Exactly.
Yeah, like when someone says, I suggest that he go to the doctor.
Right.
He might not be going to the doctor,
Yeah.
but the suggestion is like floating out there in the subjunctive space.
Exactly. Or you think about the classic example, if I were you, I wouldn't do that.
Right.
That immediately signals like we're in a hypothetical situation here.
Right.
And in the context of the sitcom, like this kind of phrasing can really subtly reveal a character's like desires or anxieties without stating them directly.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to another thing that I think we see all the time in the way that the friends on the show talk to each other.
Okay.
Ellipsis.
Right.
So picture this like a quick exchange between two of the friends. You're not coming, can't.
Yeah.
So natural, so simple, so fast.
Okay.
But like what's actually happening there grammatically?
Ellipsis is all about efficiency,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We're dropping words that are easily understood from the context.
Mhm.
So can't, in that example, clearly means I can't come.
Right. It's basically linguistic shorthand.
Exactly.
Especially common, I think, in groups of people who are really, really close and,
Right.
and know each other really well. Like the characters on this show.
Yeah, think about like Marshall saying to Lily,
Hmm.
Lily, want to grab some pizza? And she's like, totally.
Yeah.
We all know what they mean.
Yeah.
Like, they don't need to say all those words.
Right. I would totally love to grab some pizza with you, Marshall.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about saving time. It's also about, reinforcing that sense of intimacy
Oh, yeah.
and that shared context these characters have.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I think another thing, and this is more about like, I guess the way that the characters think than necessarily the specific words they use.
Okay.
But think about this, like if Barney is trying to convince someone of something,
Mm-hmm.
he might say something like, she must be really into me.
Right. Classic Barney.
Right. So that must is doing something more than just like stating an observation.
Yeah, for sure. These are modal verbs of deduction.
Okay.
So you've got must, might, can't.
Okay.
And they really show the speaker's level of certainty
Yeah.
or like how they're kind of interpreting a situation.
Yeah.
So must be indicates a pretty high degree of confidence.
Yeah.
And of course, with Barney, that's often played for laughs.
Right. Right.
Because he's,
He's so sure of himself.
exactly. He's so sure of himself, even when he's wrong.
Yeah, so it's like his very, very strong inference, not necessarily a proven fact.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if someone were to say like Ted might be overthinking this,
Right.
that shows a little less certainty
We way less certainty. Yeah.
than if you were to say Ted must be overthinking this.
For sure. And you also see like a character might exclaim, that can't be right.
Right.
Expressing just like strong disbelief.
Yeah.
And these modals just add that layer of like subjective judgment to what's being said.
Okay, I like that. All right, so now let's move on to one. This one might not be a line straight from Belly Full of Turkey,
Okay.
but it's something that you mentioned that someone like Ted,
Oh.
in a more formal or more dramatic moment,
Okay.
might use, and that is inversion with negative adverbials
Yes.
for emphasis.
Exactly.
So what is going on?
So this is where you get the typical sentence structure kind of flipped around for dramatic effect.
It's interesting.
So if you start a sentence with a negative word or phrase like not only never, seldom,
Okay.
you can actually invert the subject and the verb.
Mm.
So instead of saying he not only told a joke,
Yeah.
you could say not only did he tell a joke, but he also did a magic trick.
Okay.
It creates a much more formal or emphatic tone.
So it's like we're shining a spotlight on that initial negative phrase,
Yeah.
and everything else that comes after it kind of like lands with more weight.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, and then finally, let's talk about this. Consider this like a phrase you might hear about a background character,
Okay.
like the guy working at the bar.
All right.
So grammatically, like what's interesting about that?
Well, it seems simple, but it's actually a shortened way of saying the guy who is working at the bar.
Right.
So we've cut out that who is
Yeah.
to make it more concise.
Okay, so what's that called?
That's called a reduced relative clause.
Okay.
And we do this all the time in English. We drop the relative pronoun like who, that, which,
Right.
and the verb to be.
Okay.
So you get things like students living in dorms
Yeah.
instead of students who are living in dorms.
Right.
Or the pizza delivered was cold instead of
Yeah.
the pizza that was delivered was cold.
Got it.
Just streamlines the language.
Okay, so what we're seeing here is that even in this like seemingly very casual dialogue of a sitcom, we're constantly encountering these like more advanced grammatical structures.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So let's jump right into it.
Let's do it.
First up is some core vocabulary. Okay, so the first one is belly.
Mm-hmm.
And, we all know what a stomach is. But belly just feels a little different, doesn't it? It's just kind of like this, it's more informal. And it just sort of has this, kind of round, satisfied
Yeah,
quality to it.
it does.
And they give a great example in the show. I'm going to go back to New York with a belly full of turkey,
Yes.
which, you could almost picture that person like, just like on the couch
Oh, yeah.
after Thanksgiving, just like, oh,
Yeah.
and just like that food coma.
Yeah, yeah. It conjures up this image of like, pleasant fullness,
Yeah.
but almost, bordering on like overindulgence, but in a good way,
Yeah.
Like there's a certain contentment associated with that phrase.
Right.
And I think, one of the things that's interesting about belly is that it's very informal.
Right.
You wouldn't typically say, in a formal setting, my belly is distended after that lovely meal. You would probably use a more formal word like stomach or abdomen, but belly is really reserved for those more casual, comfortable situations.
Totally.
And I think that's part of why it works so well in that phrase. It just it captures that feeling of like relaxed, satisfied, post-Thanksgiving bliss.
I just love that belly full of turkey because it's just so evocative.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of that feeling,
Yeah.
the next word on the list is turkey,
Of course, yes.
which of course, we all think of it as being like the star of the Thanksgiving table.
Yeah.
And that's definitely its role in this episode.
Mm-hmm.
The whole episode revolves around this Thanksgiving gathering.
Yeah.
The sources do mention that
Yeah.
turkey can also be like slang for like a foolish person.
Right, right.
But in the context of this episode, it's definitely, very much the Thanksgiving turkey.
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting that, that one word can have those two very different meanings. It just kind of makes you think about how we instantly know
Right.
which one is intended,
Yeah.
based on just the words around it.
Yeah, the context is everything.
The context is everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so moving on, we have volunteer,
Mm-hmm.
which this one's pretty clear. It's offering to do something, like offering your time and your effort to help out
Yeah.
without, getting paid or expecting any kind of payment.
Mm-hmm.
So we see Lily doing this in the episode. It says, Lily volunteers at a soup kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have an example sentence. She volunteers at the animal shelter every weekend.
Yeah.
So it really emphasizes that like willing act of giving back.
Yeah.
And, I thought it was interesting that the source also mentioned that it's not just about the action itself, but it's also about the motivation behind it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So when we say someone volunteers, it often implies that they have this like desire to contribute,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah, there's a sense of like community spirit
A total.
and altruism that's often associated with volunteering.
Right, right. Okay, and then we have arrested.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Not good.
So this one, unfortunately, happens to Barney in the episode.
Yeah, yeah.
It means to be taken into police custody
Mm-hmm.
because they suspect that you've broken the law.
Right.
So the example from the episode, it says, Barney ends up getting arrested at the shelter.
Oh, boy.
And we have another example sentence. He was arrested for causing a public disturbance.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it definitely was not the Thanksgiving that he was hoping for, I imagine.
No, probably not. I mean, arrested is a pretty serious word.
Yeah.
It indicates that there's a potential legal situation.
Right.
And, it can have some pretty serious consequences. Right.
Right. Okay, next up, we have tradition, which is all about those, those customs and those beliefs and those practices that get passed down through generations.
Yeah.
So the episode emphasizes Marshall's strong connection to his family's Thanksgiving traditions.
Right.
And we have a good example sentence. Eating together on Sundays is a family tradition.
Yeah.
And it just kind of makes you think about, those things that you do year after year in your own life.
Yeah.
Without even thinking about it.
Yeah, it's just what you do.
Yeah, that's just what we do.
Yeah.
Maybe certain foods that you always make at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Or certain gifts that you always give.
Yeah.
It's just that's what we do.
Yeah, it's that sense of continuity and,
Right.
connection to the past.
Yeah.
And it can be really powerful.
Absolutely. What's a tradition that comes to mind for you?
Well, one that comes to mind is every year for my birthday, my family always makes me this very specific type of cake.
Wow.
It's like a chocolate cake with like a raspberry filling.
Oh, wow.
And it's nothing fancy, but it's been a tradition since I was a kid.
That's awesome.
And it just wouldn't feel like my birthday without it.
Yeah. So true. For me, it's we always watch the same cheesy holiday movies.
Oh, yeah.
Every year. It wouldn't feel like the holidays without those cheesy movies.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Moving on. We have fertility,
Mm-hmm.
which relates to the biological ability to conceive and have children.
Right.
So the episode mentions a doctor
Mm-hmm.
discussing fertility signs with Lily.
Right.
And then we have an example sentence. They visited a clinic to check their fertility.
Yeah.
So it's a very direct, kind of fundamental
Mhm.
aspect of human biology.
It is.
But it is, as the source mentions, it's often a very personal and, it can be an emotional topic, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, for many people, fertility is a very sensitive subject.
Right.
And it can be, fraught with all sorts of anxieties and hopes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think, it's important to be aware of that when you're using the word fertility.
Right. And then we have fertility goddess,
Right.
which is kind of, taking fertility and,
Yeah.
into a more kind of figurative
Yeah.
realm.
Right.
So this isn't a scientific term, but it's more like a mythological concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's a female figure who represents the power of reproduction
Mm-hmm.
and childbirth.
Yeah.
So the note mentions that Lily is jokingly referred to as a fertility goddess
Mm-hmm.
in the episode.
Right.
And then we have an example sentence, ancient cultures often worshipped fertility goddesses.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting how they kind of took this, this ancient idea
Mm-hmm.
and kind of applied it
Yeah.
in a more modern, humorous context.
Yeah. It's definitely, there's a sense of playfulness.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Disqualified.
Mm.
This means being declared ineligible to continue in a
Right.
competition or an activity, usually because you've broken a rule or something like that.
Yeah.
So the episode mentions Barney being disqualified from the volunteer program.
Of course he was.
Yeah, I know.
Typical Barney.
It's not really a huge shock, is it?
No.
No. Given his track record.
Yeah.
The example sentence is, she was disqualified for cheating in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So, the key thing here is that you're not allowed to participate anymore.
Right.
And it's usually because you've done something wrong
Yeah.
or you haven't met the criteria or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Charity.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an organization that's established to help people in need.
Right.
So the soup kitchen in the episode where Lily is volunteering is a perfect example of a charity.
Mm-hmm.
And we have another sentence. They donated money to a local charity.
Yeah.
So it's about providing assistance and support to those who are less fortunate.
Yeah.
All right. And then finally, in our core vocabulary, we have breakup,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
which sadly, is about the end of a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
So the notes mention that there's a couple at the shelter
Mm-hmm.
in the episode who goes through a breakup.
Right.
And we have an example sentence. they broke up after 5 years together.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a common experience.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's a widely understood phrase.
Yeah.
So it's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was quite a few vocabulary words.
It was quite a few, yeah.
Yeah.
But now we get into some of the fun stuff.
Yes, the phrases.
Which is the everyday phrases, right? So the first one that's listed is belly full of turkey,
Yeah.
which, we just talked about belly and we talked about turkey.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of, it's used to describe that feeling of like, extreme fullness after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, that Thanksgiving food coma.
Right, right. So we have the example from the episode, I'm going to go back to New York with a belly full of turkey.
Mm-hmm.
And then another example, after dinner I had a belly full of turkey and all I wanted to do was lie on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it's like, we can all relate to that feeling.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like just, I just ate so much.
Yeah, it's that feeling of like happy but almost uncomfortable fullness.
Yeah.
You're so full that you can barely move, but you're also like strangely satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes that phrase so funny is because it captures that feeling so perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got this.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is just like short and to the point.
Yeah.
It's a way of telling someone like, you've got it. Like, I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mentioned that it's used when someone volunteers to take charge of something in the episode.
Yeah.
And then we have this good example. Don't worry about setting the table. I've got this.
Yeah.
So, it projects that confidence
Right.
and that willingness to take responsibility.
It does. It's a very assuring phrase.
Yeah.
And it can be really helpful in situations where, someone's feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's a way of like, stepping in and saying, hey, I'll take care of this. You don't need to worry.
Yeah.
And it can be very reassuring to the person who's hearing it.
Absolutely. Okay. I can't believe this is happening.
Oh.
So this one, you use this when you're like just disbelief.
Yeah.
You're just like so surprised by something that's unfolding
Mm-hmm.
that you just can't even believe it.
Yeah, you're just like shocked.
Yeah. So they think that Lily might use this
Mm-hmm.
when she's feeling like, frustrated or
Yeah.
just incredulous in the episode.
Right.
And a good example, I can't believe this is happening. My car just got towed,
Mm-hmm.
like that, just that.
Yeah, it's that feeling of like disbelief and
Yeah.
often like frustration or anger or even amusement,
Right.
depending on the situation.
It depends on the situation. Yeah.
But it's that like heightened emotional state.
Right. Right. Long story short,
Oh yeah, classic.
which I feel like we all use
Mm,
when we're telling a story.
all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a way of like, skipping over all the little details
Yeah.
and just getting to the main point.
Exactly.
So it says Ted or another character in the show likely use it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the example. Long story short, the date was a disaster.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a good way to just kind of,
Yeah, it's a good way to save time. Yeah.
and get to the point.
Exactly. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
So this is that, like, kind of casual,
Yeah.
often enthusiastic, like suggestion
Yeah.
to leave a place.
Yeah.
And they suggest that this might be said
Mm-hmm.
when the characters want to escape, like an awkward situation
Right.
in the episode.
Yeah.
And we have the example, this party is dead. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
Which I think we've all, like, felt that, right?
Oh, first of all,
At some point, we're just like,
yeah, we've all been there.
okay, it's time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That explains a lot.
Mhm.
So you use this when you're like, oh, like when a new piece of information suddenly makes sense of something.
Yeah.
That was confusing before.
Mm-hmm.
Like it clarifies things.
Yeah.
And they suggest that it might be used when someone reveals a funny or strange fact
Mm-hmm.
in the episode.
Right. I had a good example. Oh, you're afraid of clowns. That explains a lot.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, when you're putting together a puzzle
Mhm.
and you finally find that last piece
Yes.
and it all makes sense.
Exactly. It's that moment of like, aha, I get it now.
Right. Okay, that's messed up, which is
Oh yeah, that's a good
a
one.
little,
Yeah.
it's a little informal,
Formal, yeah.
but it's basically a way to express that something is wrong.
yeah.
Unfair
Yeah.
or just generally like unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So they think it might be used
Yeah.
in relation to Barney's, questionable
Right.
actions.
At the
Shelter.
Yeah.
And a good example is he didn't even apologize. That's
Yeah.
messed up.
Yeah. So it's definitely a phrase that carries a strong negative connotation.
Right.
It's a way of saying that something is like really, really wrong
Yeah.
or unjust or unethical.
Okay, what's the catch? So you use this when something sounds too good to be true.
Yes.
And you're kind of like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, there's got to be something else going on here.
Yeah.
So they think it could come up maybe in the shelter scene,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even in the context of, like, dating
Right.
in the episode.
Yeah.
We have this great example. They're giving away free pizza. Sounds amazing. What's the catch?
Yeah, exactly. It's that feeling of like, suspicion.
Right.
Like, okay, something's not quite right here.
Yeah.
There's got to be a downside.
Right. Okay, don't judge me.
Yeah.
Which this one can be used either playfully
Mm-hmm.
or more seriously.
Yeah.
It's basically like when you're about to admit to doing something
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of out of the ordinary
Yeah.
or potentially embarrassing.
Yeah.
So they think Lily or Barney might say this.
Mm-hmm.
And then a good example is, I watched the whole season in one day. Don't judge me.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all been there, haven't we?
Oh, for sure.
You just get hooked on a show
Yeah.
and you just like, I can't stop.
Yeah, I got to finish it.
Yeah. And then finally, weirdest Thanksgiving ever,
Mm-hmm.
which is a great way to sum up, like, a Thanksgiving celebration
Yeah.
that just didn't go according to plan.
Yeah.
So they think that this might be said at the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Between the spilled gravy and the unexpected argument, this was the weirdest Thanksgiving ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's Thanksgiving. Things happen.
It happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really love this way of looking at English
Yeah.
and seeing these words and phrases, in action
Yeah.
in this episode of How I Met Your Mother.
Absolutely. Okay, so Thanksgiving, it's basically the big kahuna, right? The whole episode spins around it.
Right.
So why is Thanksgiving such a huge deal in American culture? Like, what's the big fuss all about?
Well, I think the episode actually highlights some of the core elements. It's about family, first and foremost.
Yeah.
It's about coming together, often traveling from far and wide.
Yeah, you see that a lot in the episode with all the characters and their travel plans.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, there's the food. I mean, Thanksgiving is practically synonymous with a huge feast.
Oh, yeah.
And gratitude's a big part of it, too, the whole idea of being thankful for what you have.
Right. And speaking of food, we can't forget the iconic phrase belly full of turkey.
Ah, yes.
That's like pure Thanksgiving, isn't it?
It really is. It's not just about eating a lot. It's about that kind of blissful, almost sleepy state you get after a huge Thanksgiving meal.
That's so true. I mean, who hasn't experienced that, right?
I know I have. Now, the episode also throws Barney, the character, into an interesting scenario.
That's one way to put it.
Volunteering at a soup kitchen. So can you talk a little bit about the cultural significance of these places, especially, around the holidays?
Sure. Soup kitchens and homeless shelters play a really vital role in, supporting people who are struggling, especially during tough times.
Right.
And around Thanksgiving, that spirit of giving back, of helping those less fortunate, it really comes to the forefront.
Yeah, and you often see people volunteering at these places as a way to, give back and kind of embody that Thanksgiving spirit.
Exactly.
Even if, in Barney's case, it doesn't quite go according to plan.
That's the sitcom element, right?
Yeah.
Taking a real situation and amping it up for laughs. Yeah, exactly. And speaking of sitcom moments, there's that memorable scene where Barney ends up in Prison Orange.
Oh, yeah, classic.
Now, for anyone who's not familiar with that image, what's the deal with that color?
Prison Orange, it's more than just a color, right?
It's almost a symbol.
It is. It's become this very strong visual cue in American culture. It instantly signals incarceration. You see it in movies, TV shows, you name it, and everyone gets it. It's become shorthand for jail.
Right. And it's funny because even though it's a funny scene, it touches on something that's pretty recognizable in American culture.
Definitely. It's like a shared cultural reference point.
Yeah.
And the episode does that with a lot of things.
It does, it does. Like, for instance, there's that whole back and forth about baby names and the in-laws.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
That's gotta be a relatable scenario for a lot of people, right?
It is. It really is. The whole idea of in-laws having strong opinions about baby names is a common theme in American families. And
Mm.
sitcoms love to play with that dynamic because it's funny, but it also, speaks to those family negotiations, those little power struggles that can happen.
Oh, for sure. And then, of course, there's Marshall's family, this huge traditional Midwestern family,
Right.
which is such a contrast to Lily's experience. Is that like a common cultural, I don't know, trope or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
The idea of the big, boisterous, sometimes overbearing Midwestern family, it's definitely a trope you see a lot in American comedies. And it often plays off the differences between, rural and urban life.
Yeah, and it's always good for a laugh.
It is. It is.
And that's, I think, a big part of how sitcoms use these cultural moments, right?
Absolutely. They take these things that we all kind of recognize, like holiday gatherings or trying to do good deeds. They just dial it up to 11.
Yeah, they exaggerate it for comedic effect, like Barney getting arrested while trying to volunteer.
Perfect example. It's absurd, but it's also rooted in something we can all relate to.
Mm.
Good intentions gone awry.
So as we kind of wrap up this cultural snapshot through the lens of How I Met Your Mother, what are the big takeaways here? Like, what can we actually glean about American culture from this one episode?
Well, I think first and foremost, you see Thanksgiving really cemented as this central holiday, this big family event.
Even if it's a little chaotic.
Yeah, even if it gets a little messy.
And you also see that emphasis on helping others, that idea of giving back, even if it's, portrayed in a comedic, slightly dysfunctional way.
Right.
And then you've got these little cultural touchstones, like the whole prison orange thing.
Exactly. These little visual cues that everyone instantly gets.
It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it, how many other seemingly ordinary TV shows or movies are actually packed with these little insights into, how culture works, how people think.
It's fascinating, isn't
Here's a synopsis of How I Met Your Mother, Season 1, Episode 9, Belly Full of Turkey. It's Thanksgiving, and the gang splits up for the holiday. Lily joins Marshall in Minnesota to meet his loud, quirky family. Things get awkward when she realizes how different their family traditions are, and how much pressure there is to have lots of kids and name them after Marshall's relatives. Meanwhile, Ted and Robin volunteer at a soup kitchen, where they unexpectedly run into Barney. It turns out Barney isn't volunteering out of kindness, he's hitting on women. Chaos breaks out, and Barney ends up in jail for fighting a volunteer. Back in New York, Ted and Robin share a moment that hints at deeper feelings between them. The episode ends with everyone reunited and full of food, and with Barney still stuck in jail.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning new words, phrases, grammar, and cultural references from How I Met Your Mother. I'll be back with the next lesson soon. Until then, bye.